Hey,
Hello, hello.
how
Slava
are you?
Ukraini.
Героям слава.
I'm good. I'm good. It's been busy despite that it is Easter holiday in many places here in Europe. But what's a holiday for Ukrainian these days, right? So it's
Yeah,
been extremely busy today,
exactly.
um, with good and bad news, unfortunately, altogether. But that's a regular routine for us. How about you?
Yeah, I'm also, as I said, I think last time we spoke on Friday, right? It was also bank holiday, Easter holiday. In a lot of places, it was a bit weird that everyone was off and like in parks and celebrating, and here we are.
Okay, so let's just move on. And before I introduce and we introduce together Valeria, our featured Ukrainian for today, for those who are joining for the first time, let me remind you what Ukrainian Spaces is all about. So, in a nutshell, together with Valeria, we know so many Ukrainians with perfect English, sharing their stories across all social media platforms these days. Yet the conversations about Ukraine are still dominated by Western, mostly white, mostly male folks. And not only it continuously robs Ukrainians of their agency, but it also perpetuates outdated, misleading, and false narratives about Ukraine and Ukrainians. So we want to foster instead a relaxed, safe, and chill space for Ukrainians where they can express themselves without the need of fitting any Western boxes, and the rest can use the space to educate themselves and decolonize your views of Ukrainian. Okay, Valeria, I think it's time for us to feature our featured Ukrainian today.
Absolutely. And I just, before I start, Maria, how's your mic? I know you had some problems. Can you hear us and speak?
Hello.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. We can hear you.
Excellent.
But as Maxim always says, our main ground rule is for each Ukrainian to introduce themselves to the audience. So, Maria, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Val and Maksym, thank you so much for having me here today and for inviting me to participate in Ukrainian Voices. It's such an honor to be here with the two of you and with everyone listening. So thank you so much. With that, my name is Maria or Masha. I'm from Kyiv. I was born in Kyiv, and I've been in Canada now for over 15 years. I came here permanently at the age of 15. And yeah, so Ukrainian living in Canada and just trying to do my best to elevate Ukrainian history and culture and share the very vibrant and rich culture that we have, because especially having spent so much time in Canada and in the West and in Western academic spaces and in Western activism circles, it's very clear how unclear Ukrainian history and culture are for a lot of Westerners. So just trying to do my part in providing some clarification.
Maria, can I ask you, because this is a similar situation, a lot of us had completely different lives and before the genocide started and before the invasion started. So would you maybe share what is comfortable? What would you do before before becoming prominent explainer of Ukraine on Instagram?
Yeah, of course. So in school I did two masters. I did one in sort of under the umbrella of public affairs in Russian, European, and Eurasian studies. And then I did another one in women's studies. And I've been working in nonprofit. So I've really been in the sphere of working with survivors of violence, in particular women and children fleeing domestic violence, and folks experiencing homelessness, but also have been quite active in the LGBT scene and activism. And most recently, leading up to the war, I was working with queer refugees and newcomers to Canada.
Wow, yeah. Well, as if your life hasn't been busy enough before, right? Which is something we definitely something we definitely share. So yeah, tell me please. I mean, you already mentioned, and it's not a surprise for anyone that Ukraine is still misunderstood, and this is something that I've been struggling before the war as well, because I've been spending many years trying to explain Ukraine and explaining Ukraine in so many ways with like hundreds of interviews and whatnot. And sometimes it always felt to me like this growing frustration that you've already said everything possible. You've already used every possible argument, but still people come to you back and with the same old questions. So how do you deal with that? And what have you figured out that motivates you to keep doing that and trying new formats and whatnot?
Oh, yeah, it's so difficult, especially in the West. An experience that I've had often is when I tell people that I'm from Ukraine, I'm from Kiev. People always say, "Oh, is that a part of Russia, or that's a city in Russia or a region of Russia?" And explaining to them that no, we are an independent country. We've been independent since 1991. Before the 70 years or so of Soviet occupation and rule, we were independent before that. We were a nation before the Soviet Union. And in fact, Ukraine is older and has a richer history than Russia, with Kiev Rus. So really, I think that was what sparked the interest in presenting and packaging information in a way that is accessible to people. And oftentimes a question that I get so often is, well, if you're Ukrainian and you're from Ukraine and you're proud of being Ukrainian and your family is Ukrainian, why do you speak Russian? And so that was really another sort of foundational question that sparked this desire to educate people. And I really look at history as a toolbox. It's a toolbox that gives us tools to understand the present. And so I thought I had this platform already on Instagram because I did embroidery. I was quite involved in the online and offline embroidery world. And so I gained this platform of followers. And so when the war started, I pivoted and I thought, what, embroidery will take a rest. I really need to use this platform and this audience to engage with people and educate people about the reality of Ukraine, because so many people are misled both about the history and the present. And especially, like you said, so much of the narrative is constructed and relayed by either by Western journalists or think tanks or specialists or academics or what have you, who really don't have that personal connection to Ukraine. I mean, sure, perhaps they've studied it, perhaps they've been deployed to Ukraine, absolutely, but that just doesn't give you the same nuance and the same context if you've lived it, you've experienced it, your family has experienced it. And so I thought, what a perfect opportunity to highlight what Ukraine is, who we are, what we have to offer, and what we've been struggling with, not just since February 24th, but the last 8 years, the last 70 years, the last 3 centuries.
Absolutely. Amen. And this is you're a perfect person for Ukrainian spaces exactly for the reason like that. And sometimes I feel like a bit of a jerk. Because before the invasion, I had this months and months of this frustration when I start thinking that maybe it makes no sense doing interviews. It makes no sense to explain Ukraine anymore because whatever I do, it just doesn't yield the same impact. And people keep coming back with you with the same stupid myths and questions over and over again, as if you haven't done that work at all. But then, when the war started and we started seeing the outpouring of such a tremendous, stellar work of other Ukrainians like yourself, explaining Ukraine with new passion, with new energy, kind of put me to shame. And definitely Ukrainian Spaces is part of the reason why we're doing that, to kind of boost that awareness right away. Valeria, I know that we have someone else with us today.
I was excited to see Tetyana join us as well. Tetyana Denford, who has been doing a lot of the similar work as both Maria, myself, Maksym, on all platforms across the board. So we're very glad to have you as well. And I hope that we can see how we can sort of talk a little bit more in detail about the work that both of you guys do. But Tetyana, would you be able to introduce yourself to our audience as well?
Привіт, друзі!
Привіт.
Ай, Боже, я змучена. Okay. My name is Tetyana. My maiden name is Bisyk, which means little devil. So, дуже дякую. And I am I've always been a proud Ukrainian woman, and I've always been very vocal, and I've always tried to teach people about Ukraine for most of my life. And now, even though it's unfortunate, these circumstances, this is our moment. And I don't think I've slept very much in the last month, but I am proud to be talking to anybody I can. So yes, and I'm an author. I'm a translator, and I've also been a kind of ad hoc journalist lately. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask you about your book? Because this is something dissimilar as we asked Maria. There was a life for every Ukrainian before and after. So the life before and the book that you wrote, can you tell us a bit more about it and how
my life before? Or the
yeah.
So I am first generation immigrant. I'm first generation born in New York, but my entire family are immigrants from Ivano-Frankivsky Oblasti. So outside, if nobody knows where that is, that's outside Lviv, which is why right now I think we're all a bit on edge at this point because it feels like nowhere is safe. But anyway, so that is where my bloodline is from. I am a city girl. So I grew up in Ukrainський осередок in the East Village, Mala Ukraina, Little Ukraine. And that was kind of my life as I knew it. It's, I did not speak English until I was 7. It's funny, I sound really American now, but back then I was very much like a very thick accent. I remember even then on the subway, people not understanding, even though I was born in 76. So even in the 80s, people heard us speaking Ukrainian saying, go back to where you came from and, speak American, which American isn't even a language, but let's not go there.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, I did Ukrainsky tanci, Ukrainian national dances. I was part of a dance troupe called Sizukreli. And I went to Ukrainian camp, like Plast. I went to Ukrainian, basically, it's like Ukrainian Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, Plast. And I did Ukrainian school on Saturday mornings. And I remember at the time, I used to fight against it because, our family was very hell-bent on making sure that even though we were living in New York and we had to learn English, we were very much kind of a Ukrainian family with our traditions, and we kept everything alive. And I remember as a teenager, I was trying to explain to people who were curious, friends of mine, of saying about, Ukraine and what it is and the culture and the history and the legends. And so, oh, yeah, Ukraine is Russia, right? You speak Russian. Now, okay, there are a lot of Ukrainians that speak Russian because that was forced upon them for so long, but I was trying to explain how separate Ukrainians have always felt. That's the thing that I feel very passionate about, is that even though we were under Soviet, or, Ukraine was under Soviet rule for so long, in your heart, you feel separate. You feel that, you have a foothold into who you are and what your country is, no matter who's telling you otherwise, no matter what bully is trying to convince you that you are less than. We were always more than, And I've always been I've always been writing, and I wrote freelance for Elle and Vogue when I was in the city. but I was always writing on the side. And about 6 years ago, I found my babcia, babcia Yulia, her name, Yulia Rudnicki. We found out that amazingly, that there was a secret that she'd kept her whole life, and it was about a long lost family. She had children that she was forced to leave behind because of what was happening.
In Ukraine, you mean?
No, actually, she escaped the war, but then they ended up settling in Australia. Mm-hmm. And because of, they were living in migrant camps at the time, and they were given jobs basically to work the land. And they were in the middle of nowhere in the Dust Bowl in Australia. And unfortunately, she was the victim of an assault. And she was forced to give up, who are now my aunt and uncle. She was forced to give up children, and they emigrated to New York. She had no choice. And it was a very, very painful story. But when this came out, I remember I'm an only child, and I'm kind of the last of me, I guess you could say, of my family, of the Bisyks. So I said, right, I'm the only one that can write the story, I think. And that's what I did. I sat down and wrote this book, and a lot of agents said, this is great. And they wanted the full manuscript. They wanted me to change the story. And I said, I'm sorry, but that is not up for debate, which is really funny because now everybody sees Ukrainians as going, I don't want to give up any part of my country. This is yeah. And this was the story that I needed to keep with what I was giving Baba Yulia, and this is her life, this is her story, and I'm going to do it. So I self-published, and and
everybody can check it out when they go on your profile. And I love this story because a lot of writing, when it comes to me, always comes from very personal areas. And a lot of my best writing and my best reporting has been always inspired by stories I learned about me, myself, my family as well. And this is something very important you also mentioned about the language. And I think it's just so funny because when you described your experiences as growing up as Ukrainian, speaking with Ukrainian accent, in America, and when people would shame you or bully you, this is something that I experienced growing up in Eastern Ukraine, having Russian as a first language, but then going to my grandparents for many months and coming back with a thick Ukrainian accent, and people would shame you and bully you, even teachers saying well, this is how peasants speak. You should learn real language, aka Russian language.
Yeah.
This is absolutely remarkable how experiences of Ukrainians still very similar despite separated by oceans.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, what's interesting is that I have never been. I think it's a very. I don't know, but I think it's a very specific Ukrainian trait to be very stubborn with holding on to who we are. Honestly, it's funny because my friends now are messaging me saying, now I understand you better because they see how Ukrainians are, how they behave, because we have grace and humility, but we also have this passion that we will never, ever let go of. We have this
100%.
And it's a fearlessness. And now people are going, all of this makes sense now. Because even as an adult, when I was living in the UK for 12 years, I was living in a small English village, and I was always stuck out. And because, it's a different language that I speak, that I was speaking to my kids, and I've always spoken it, but also it's just, I don't know, maybe how I carry myself or something. But I was bullied as an adult by women who were like, oh, who does she think she is? I'm like, if you knew me, you'd understand that I am the biggest, most sensitive person, and I'm a big klutz. But I will always carry myself really proudly. And I think people don't understand that.
Yeah. I also call it anti-colonial stamina, I think. The way I see it. Yeah. I know, Valeria, you had also a very similar question to Maria.
So on the topic of sort of, I think a lot of people have realized, I don't even know, it's stubbornness mixed with just, years of not being heard, which I'm actually proud of as a Ukrainian to have. But I wanted to ask Maria a question that we actually have discussed on Instagram quite a few times ourselves. But obviously there was something that caused you to want to do more work on your own channel. As you said, you completely shifted from embroidery to teaching the world about Russian imperialism and colonialism and historical facts about what happened before and things like that. But what is your sort of number one pet peeve or myth that has been sort of repeated on and on in Western media that has really caused you, that has really been sending, I don't know, shockwaves and really sat under your skin?
Yeah. Yeah, we've chatted about this, you and I have, and I think Tetyana and I, we've also spoken about this. One of the sort of silver linings of this that has come out is that I've met such an incredible collective of Ukrainians, in particular Ukrainian women who are so vocal, so adamant, and so active in sort of spreading the truth. And the common thread that we've all noticed, every single one of us has noticed, is this fallacy or this myth that imperialism is only an American phenomenon, that Russia cannot be an imperial power. We see this most recently with Noam Chomsky. For those who aren't familiar with Noam Chomsky, he's a Jewish American, a political scientist, and he speaks and writes, and he's an academic, and he speaks and writes very widely about imperialism, empire, and anti-imperialism. And most recently, he has been commenting that what Russia is doing, Russia's aggression, violence, war, genocide, that these are not facets of empire and imperialism because Russia is not imperialist. He believes, and so many people, especially on the left, in leftist circles, believe that imperialism only applies to America. And this absolutely, it destroys me. And that was probably one of the first two posts that I made on my Instagram when I pivoted. And it was pretty well received, but of course there was a lot of pushback and people, again, especially on the left. And I want to say I'm not disparaging the left. Like, I myself identify as a leftist. Prior to the war, I probably would have described myself closer to a socialist, a democratic socialist. I believe very, very deeply in all of the facets that sort of make up leftism, universal healthcare, equality in marriage, all of these sort of ideas and belief systems and value systems that make up the left. I subscribe to those very heavily. But seeing the left's reaction and response to this genocide has been so beyond disappointing. Disappointing doesn't even begin to encompass it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, like, we see it on the right as well. We see it from Fox News. We see it from far right and right politicians and advocates. But it makes sense, sort of. In our worldview, it makes sense when it comes from the right, because we're used to seeing dehumanizing policies and beliefs from the right. We're used to narrative and rhetoric from the right of the political spectrum that doesn't often afford agency and voice to oppressed or marginalized people who are affected. But on the left, that's the entire foundation of the left. It's listening to people who are marginalized, giving agency to people who are oppressed and experiencing violence and war, sexual assault, rape. But here we're being silenced from both ends of the political spectrum. And so it's been incredibly frustrating and challenging. And so one of the points that I've been really trying to drive home on Instagram is that Russia is an empire. Russia is an imperialist power. It is absolutely imperialism. The actions that it's taken in expanding its borders is imperialism. And I really, that's the one takeaway that I wish for people to go home with from this podcast today, is that if you are anti-imperialist, then you stand squarely on the side of Ukraine and Ukrainians.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And also, just to say, I'm sure Maksym would add this, not just Ukrainians, but a lot of other countries, nations that have been oppressed by the Russian Empire for centuries.
Yes, absolutely.
Around.
Georgians, Baltics, Poles, absolutely.
Yeah. Perhaps, Tetyana, would you like to take this one as well?
Yeah, I think, here's the thing we live in a digital world and everything is at our fingertips at a moment's notice. And I think, the issue that we're facing as creators and as kind of vocal activists is that we are being pushed back by people who want to find a narrative for their own agenda. And when it comes to like, for example, with social media, with Instagram is a very fragile place, I've realized, because there are a lot of Ukrainians who are creators, who are journalists, who are activists, who are being silenced and shadow banned. And amazingly, I've been just trying to test Instagram's policies by reporting very racist posts by people who support Russia and who said that Ukrainians should go kill themselves and blah, blah, blah. And it's quite disturbing. And the messages that I get back are saying that this does not go against community guidelines, which for me is a very clear sign that the Ukrainians have to push harder on the narrative right now when it comes to certain hashtags like Stand With Ukraine and People of Ukraine and Art for Ukraine. And I think the legacy that we need to leave as far as like how we persevere in this war, because sometimes it feels like we're not winning in a lot of ways. And I completely get that. I was translating some new footage of Zelensky the other day, and he was like, this is still not winning what's happening to us. But if we persevere in the way that we can, with kind of this new hope, this fierce kind of protectiveness of our, our art, our voices, our literature, sharing stories of, different activists in the past that people don't know of. I think that's the legacy that we need to leave. Because Russia has pretty much one avenue of, one narrative, which is we're going to take all your shit and then we're going to fuck off. Like that's because they envy the creation that we have had over the years, the creation of beauty, independence, free thinking, magic, whatever we have. I think with Russia, there is a very jealous narrative on the whole, and I think that's always been the case. But I think this war is a very new kind of evolution of how Ukrainians fight back in the modern way. We have a president, like I said before on different spaces, like we have a president, he is a modern representation of the future of what Ukrainians want. It has a consistent message with how we keep the narrative within this both kind of fierce and fearless and kind of, we're not aggressive. People don't see Ukrainians as aggressive. We are seen as very generous and humble, but we are also very protective, and we're going to fight to the death.
One of my favorite parallels, although I genuinely hate to bring parallels between Russians and Ukrainians, because this is something that needs to be also decolonized, and I would love to have a conversation about Ukraine where in some future where there is not a single time Russia is mentioned. Amen to that. But one of the things about something that inspires me every day about Ukrainians is how you guys, Tetyana and Maria included, you bring education and educating of people to different social media platforms. Like, for example, I'm really encouraging people to go on Tetyana's Twitter and Maria's Instagram, Vinok Collective. And one of the posts, and something that I want Maria also to ask about, one of the posts you did, it's called The June Deportations and Russian Terror Continued, where basically you, starting with the point that what is happening now, and we're unfortunately seeing deportation and ethnic cleansing on Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine at the moment, kids being kidnapped and shipped to Russia to re-educate, to, for learning Russian as well. But this is something, the same copy-paste job that has been adopted and used before. And you, Maria, in your post, you basically do a fantastic set of cards educating audiences about other deportations that Russia did throughout the history of other indigenous nations. So can you tell me, like, how's the reaction of your audience in general to posts like that? Do you get a lot of people who are saying, well, wow, I never knew about this, or what it's in general, the feedback you get for posts like that?
Yeah, for the most part, because I've I've kind of landscaped and curated my audience to a point where anyone who is a troll or pro Kremlin, I've just blocked. And I've been in this journey now with this particular rhetoric for, I guess, 6-7 weeks, and I really trimmed and blocked anyone who is confrontational on topics like this. So, and I think that's necessary. That's one of the ways that I stay sane, I stay motivated, because nothing sucks my energy away as much as having to prove our struggle, prove our identity, prove the atrocities that we've survived and we've lived through, our neighbors have survived and lived through, to someone who, has taken one poli-sci class and is sitting in a basement on their keyboard arguing, never having experienced this. So having said that, the reception is very positive, and I get a lot of messages from people saying, thank you so much for speaking about Poland. Thank you so much for speaking about the atrocities in Estonia, because I think that so many people have forgotten the atrocities of what Soviet Russia, pre-Soviet Russia, Tsarist Russia, and current Russia have done. I mean, we don't even have to look at Soviet times. We can look at what Russia has done in Georgia in the last 12 or so years ago. And we see this as a continuum. This violence, this pillaging, this genocide is a continuum of behavior, a continuum of action, and this hatred towards all of Russia's neighbors, I think, begins at such a young age. And again, we really see this now with children being led into formations of the letter Z and having to wear the black and orange ribbons. We see such a grooming of anti-Ukrainian, anti-Baltic, anti-Polish, anti-Georgian sentiment from such a young age, and such a grooming of Russian supremacy that I think a lot of people, again, particularly in the West, because that's where I'm based, they really don't understand or know or recognize the history, which is why I think it's so important to present that history and package it in a way that is digestible for people, to contextualize what is happening right now. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people who are not familiar with Eastern Europe sort of navigate this entire war from the perspective of poor Russia. Well, no, Russians can't resist. Russians can't be activists. Russians can't advocate against Putin because they go to jail. And it really infuriates me and breaks my heart to see people taking that position, because this isn't anything new. This has been generations upon generations, and not just towards Ukraine. It's, like I said, it's been to the Caucasus, the Baltics, Eastern Europe in general. And so, again, I really think of history as a toolbox. And once people have those tools of that knowledge, that language, those facts that are indisputable, these are things that happened. These are things that continue to happen. Once people can lean on that evidence, it really makes for opening up a dialogue that is much more conducive to understanding what is happening now through Ukrainian agency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is something that we discussed with so many other guests, and one after another, we all arrive at the conclusion that Ukrainians and other representatives of other colonized nations are the best speakers for it, because, I mean, sometimes it's depressing to understand that generation after generation, where facing the similar shit, the same shit over and over again. Our parents, our grandparents, our grandparents, each generation of Ukrainians has been really fucked up in really violent way by Russian colonialism. And if it keeps happening, why in the hell the other people abroad cannot pick up the signs that this is something that has to stop? Tetyana, we also had a question for you because right before the broadcast, you also posted amazing stuff that I really loved. And I know Valeria is also shares this adoration for this thread.
Legende?
Yeah. And this is something, I mean, I don't know how it happened. I know how it happened, but the majority of our guests are always women because Ukrainian women are absolutely the most kick-ass, fantastic women one can find. But yeah, can you tell us a bit more about the thread that you posted about the legends about Ukrainian women?
Yes,
because it's amazing.
This is the thing, like I always, and I have a lot of Ukrainian friends who have said before, they always felt they grew up wearing certain talismans and brooches, and they always felt like these witchy vibes. I don't even know how to explain it, but any Ukrainian woman would know what it feels like. There is something extra that you have in your soul and in your bones. And today I wanted to it's very easy for me to be very reactive and emotional and political. So sometimes I feel like I just want to say, fuck this, fuck, like I just want to just keep swearing, which is why sometimes I teach people Ukrainian swear words, which is great lately. But I also think, and I teach my children this, that information is power. It doesn't matter what is you're up against. The more you know, the more you can carry yourself in a way that's powerful, the more you can defeat somebody else who's telling you otherwise. So I want to try and educate by, sharing certain stories about Ukrainian writers. And especially today, I started a thread about Ukrainian women and how, it's the women in our culture that are seen as really like intimidating and scary, but in a good way. I mean, I think wasn't there one territory that Russian tanks were going in, and the townspeople were saying the women here are all witches. If they touch you,
yeah,
you're gonna fall off. So it's important, I think, for people to realize that these women that we are seeing who are wearing battle gear, okay, that's kind of what all women would most Ukrainian women would do. They would get their gear on and fight right alongside their people, because for us that's been kind of inherited, this conditioning over the years. All these kind of stereotypes in media. What it really used to piss me off, that the media, movies and stuff used to see Ukrainian women as nannies, housekeepers, prostitutes, rent brides, and I'm sorry,
Hello,
but
Emily in Paris again. The second time we mentioned Emily in Paris on this podcast.
Oh my God, I cannot stand it. Like, it's just, and it really pisses me off. And sometimes, and my husband, who's a very English man, who has, he really, he really, like in the beginning, he couldn't understand why I was always so vocal and so kind of opinionated. Now he's like, no, I get it. Because we've always been kind of tossed to the side as these, like, oh, you want to meet a Ukrainian woman? Go online to ukrainianbrides.com, which is, so I wanted to teach people about Beregynia, because that is like this legend, this mystical woman who protects not only society, but who teaches about our culture. She is fire, strength, grace, beauty, all of it. And I think, it's very, when I see modern pictures now of women in battle, I'm like, that to us, to Ukrainian women, is like, yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And actually, the thing that you mentioned in the thread and tried to explain the parallels with witchcraft, it's so powerful. I mean, I'm a huge also fan of the developing narrative in world and global in English language pop culture when women reclaim the title of a witch and
Yeah.
witchcraft in a very empowering, inspiring way. And I think you nailed it in that thread, just right, perfectly, bringing those myths about Ukrainian witches into spotlight. And this is something, unfortunately, that Russian colonialism has been trying to erase, because these are the legends that Russians try to erase from our culture, from our education during Russian rule, painting Ukrainian women only as a passive sex objects, or someone who, as you said, sat at home and needed to be defended because they're terrified. As Russian colonialism is extremely patriarchal, they are terrified of women like you, Tetyana, like Maria, like women from the Ukrainian history. So thankful for
I've
you
seen it,
to you for that.
and you know what? I've seen it in front of my eyes. I've seen, unfortunately, I've seen domestic violence. Like I've seen, we had, I remember we had, oh, we were friends with this Russian man and his wife, and he used to beat the crap out of her, and
Oh,
and
no.
it was just vile. But as a kid, I was like, why is this, and again, lots of cultures have this, thing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a very, very patriarchal society, which is, it makes me rage. But anyway, whereas my grandmother had a very chauvinist husband, my grandfather, bless his soul, but he was conditioned to kind of like be like that, but she would never let him lay his hands on her, and she was like very, very, very tough, and
Yeah.
that's just, I think people need to re-educate themselves, and I think sometimes when the media says, oh, like, she's on Instagram, even I get messages sometimes of, oh, you're being so unfair, or you're being so one-sided, and I'm, honey, you have no idea what you're talking about right now,
100%, yeah. And actually that's partially, I guess Maria and I met because we did a post just recounting and speaking about how Ukrainian women are the spirit of resistance and have been over so many years of history, of Ukrainian history, and it's just so important to like keep reminding ourselves of that. But guys, we're running out a little bit of time, and we have one more, actually two questions. I'll ask one more question to Maria, and then we'll finish on our kind of classic question about what it means to be Ukrainian for each of you and what values represented. But just maybe actually to both of you, out of interest, and this is where my Instagram geekiness kind of kicks in. But Maria, I'm just genuinely curious, what has been your best performing post in terms of engagement on Instagram? Because I think that will show quite a bit to the world about what people are interested in. And I'm just genuinely curious, and same for Tetyana, since the war has started.
That's a really great question, Val. Thank you. I'm actually glad I get to speak on this. My number one performing post, it was liked about, I think, 22,000 times and shared 24,000 times, with reaching an audience of, I think, like 160,000 people, was titled, "If Ukraine is a separate and distinct nation, why do so many Ukrainians speak Russian?" And I think that really, really, it struck a chord with people, because people don't understand why, if Ukrainians are independent, we are proud, we are sovereign, why do we speak a colonizer's language? And I think, yeah, people are confused. They don't have the history. They don't have the understanding and the nuance of what it meant to be colonized by Russia under the Soviet Union. They don't understand. They don't know that Ukrainian poets, that are writers, are intellectuals, were sent to Siberia, that they were killed, murdered, displaced. They don't understand that for decades, in Kyiv and other cities, you couldn't get a job if you were Ukrainian speaking, you for the best paying jobs, you had to speak Russian. And a lot of our parents, my mom included, raised us Russian speaking in those years because for them, they thought that this was opportunity. They thought they were doing us a favor.
Yeah.
They thought that it would give us a future. And
Amen. This is
yeah,
the same
100%.
for me, and I think for Valeria as well.
Yeah, I still to this day remember stories like my mom went to the only Ukrainian class in a school that only had Russian classes, so it was like one Ukrainian class, and she told me from like, from as far back as I can remember how much bullying they experienced, the Ukrainian speaking class, which is why then I grew up speaking Russian because as you said, like it was considered like less than if you spoke Ukrainian, which I think a lot of people don't understand, but it sits so deep in our hearts and minds that it's just,
I wanted to ask, because we need to wrap it up. I think it's a perfect bridge for asking Maria and then Tetyana as well about identity. I mean, this is one of my favorite questions in with Valeria's, because so many Ukrainians are going through fundamental changes about awareness of what it means to be Ukrainian since the genocide started, since the war started. So, Maria, tell us what it means to be Ukrainian for you these days, and how has it changed since this terrible tragedy that we have to live through?
For me, it's really an unwavering commitment and dedication to just embracing all parts of my Ukrainianness. When I moved to Canada, and, I'm not proud of this, but I was very ashamed of being Ukrainian. I would really skirt the question or avoid the question when people would say, oh, where are you from? Or, oh, you have a little bit of an accent when you say so-and-so. And I did my best to absolutely train my accent to not give it away, so there'd be no clues. I was embarrassed to say, this was almost 20 years ago, but I was, in my late teens, early 20s, I was ashamed to say that I was from Ukraine because there were so many negative stereotypes, like what Tetyana mentioned, mail order brides, Chernobyl, are you part of Russia? And now really what Ukrainian identity to me is embracing all of that, and being vocal about it, being proud about it. It's solidarity, it's survivorship, it's resilience. And I'll borrow from something that Anka, she's Anka Tattoos on Instagram. She's a Ukrainian tattoo artist in Montana. She had a post about ancestral wounds and intergenerational trauma, and how no matter how much Russia tries to stamp us out, erase us, make us embarrassed of our culture, tries to assimilate us, whether through language or what have you, that we are going to resist always. Our grandparents resisted, our parents resisted, I'm going to resist. My grandparents were 12 and 13 during Holodomor. They survived. My mother survived Chernobyl and had me a year later. I was born a year later. And I myself was in Euromaidan. I was in the revolution, and people around me were shot. I've survived. My mother survived. My grandparents survived. 44 million Ukrainians have survived, and we will continue to survive. And there is nothing that Russia can do to erase us, to silence us, to minimize us. Not with their propaganda, not with their claims that we're Nazis. There is nothing they can do. So if I had to summarize Ukrainian identity in one word, I would say resilience.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Tetyana, go ahead.
No, I think for me, identity has always been wrapped up, I think, with two words, and that's fearlessness and grace. And I think we marry that very well as Ukrainians, because we are always interested and generous. Like if people, I remember, like if people visit Ukraine, it doesn't matter who you are, we will be like immediately friends. People will buy you drinks. They'll be curious. They'll want you to learn certain words. Ukrainians are not exclusive people. They are very generous and humble, and they want the world to be okay. So we are not only just interested about ourselves, ourselves, but we're interested about other cultures that have been marginalized. And I think there's a grace with that. And the fearlessness has, like, that to me has always been a Ukrainian thing, bravery and fearlessness. I think, we're kind of like made of steel, and our language and our spirit, that's something that can never be erased. It's amazing how they've tried over the years. And I think, the more people learn about how, like, somebody ages ago said, well, how would you describe Ukraine? I'd be like, we're a bunch of, we like our drink, we like magic, we like filthy jokes. We're kind of an all-rounded, pretty great people. So I think, there's something really graceful about who we are and how we love and how we fight for our country. We are not vengeful, hateful, angry people, but, we will want vengeance. There's a difference, the two are mutually
justice. This is amazing, and two of you are amazing people. I'm so glad that you joined us, and I respect your work so much. And this is something that many also Ukrainians make fun these days, that we had different lives before this, and we did all of us did something different. But now we have a very certain, a very specific job of explaining Ukraine, educating the rest of the people, because we know that in solidarity, our victory lies. And this is something that we cannot withstand without the help of others as well. I mean, we will, but we will lose much more people in this fight. So thank you so much. I really encourage people to follow Tetyana's and Maria's work. Maria is more of a celebrity on Instagram. So use the same handle to follow our work there and her explaining. Tetyana on Twitter. Tetyana, you're on Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I started on Instagram in this, I've always been writing, and people knew I was Ukrainian. As soon as this happened, like thousands upon thousands of people are showing up. I was like, no, what's happening?
You're on Instagram of the same handler, right?
Yes, handle.
Yes. So yeah, and I wanted to let other folks know that please use and claim Ukrainian Spaces hashtag on Twitter, suggest us topics, Ukrainians to feature, just share what aspects about Ukraine and being Ukrainian you think should be decolonized for foreigners. Ukrainian Spaces recordings exist as podcasts. Find them on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to rate them, because we want to make Ukrainian voices trending on podcast platforms too. And please share as widely as possible. This is just a volunteer effort. We do not make money off it, unfortunately, or not now. So please share it on all platforms possible, and follow Valeria and me on Twitter, Insta, and TikToks as well. This is for now. I hope I haven't forgotten anything, Valeria.
Just a huge thank you to Maria and Tetyana for joining. And this was, I think we've come across each other a lot and spoken a lot on Instagram, but it's been really nice to talk. I wanted to say in person, but it's not in person. So almost as close as we can get to in person right now, the four of us. So thank you so much for spending your time this Monday talking to us and helping us decolonize all the different things we want to decolonize about Ukraine. So thanks both.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Bye guys.
Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.